You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Panduit, infrastructure for a connected world. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and my guest today is Jeff Paliga, the Director of Business Development of Network Infrastructure and Data Center at Panduit. Welcome back to the show, Jeff. You were actually on with us back in episode 61, and we're thrilled to have you here again with us today.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be back. I enjoyed the first version, and I'm looking forward to additional success on this next one as well.
And we have a very interesting topic today. I am personally excited about. One of Panduit's clients is the Vatican Apostolic Library in Italy, which, for those that don't know, was founded in 1451 and preserves and displays rare manuscripts from as far back as the 3rd century. And it has things like drawings and notes by artists and scientists such as Michelangelo and Galileo. And it maintains over 80,000 manuscripts, 1.6 million printed books, more than 300,000 coins and medals, 150 prints, drawings, and engravings, and over 150 photographs and more. Why did they come to Panduit? And they had two big challenges, I know. What were they?
Yeah, so the great setup, Carrie. So as you can imagine, even for us, this project was really special and continues to be that way as well. So you'll see kind of a theme here. So before I can even jump into the primary challenges, I just really want to give just a background of how Panduit was selected. So really, the first engagement with their IT department for the Vatican Apostolic Library went back 10 years. And we weren't doing it alone, but it was a project actually not even for the library. So there were vendors included because this was a big, large undertaking. It was comprehensive and complicated. And many vendors were interested in being part of this process, right? So we all kind of started at the same introductory level, and companies like NTT Japan was sponsoring some of the first implementations. And that was, as I mentioned, that was for a facility outside of the Vatican Library. And so they were putting a lot of attention on the equipment part of it, the storage capabilities, and then naturally our portion, the Panduit portion, infrastructure, is what we were leveraging on. And we were doing a better job around, understanding the needs and having more awareness around how critical the project was. So really, our first interaction was really to work on just the structured cabling, the copper and fiber. And what we found out later, we realized that was kind of a test, if you will, to see how everybody did, how all the vendors worked together, how we all performed, how we all delivered on our solutions. And we had very positive income. So it was a little bit of a proof of concept or test for everybody. And then the Vatican Library came along and gave us a chance to work on a complete data center project. So what started off as kind of a disaster recovery really got into the heart of the Vatican City, where all the pieces you mentioned in the library, where they store all the manuscripts and all the precious historical items. That's where we were able to show kind of our capabilities and implement a full Panduit hardware software solution. So it was over a period of time trying to prove yourself because of the critical nature. And then to your second part of the question is the challenges that we were faced with is really understanding that they needed to implement, as you can imagine, a highly reliable and secure network and network infrastructure that they could have for many, many years to support the current technologies and future technologies, which isn't always easy to predict. As you can imagine, an opportunity in this space, it doesn't lend itself to becoming a high maintenance, high touch environment. And the assets and then their digital replications really have to remain secure and protected. So that was the number one. And secondly, the network had to have capacity, had to have high capacity, provide the highest allowable throughput so they can ensure the amount of work could be handled seamlessly. And that includes just not digitizing the assets, but as you can imagine, this information has been made available globally. So that network had to provide high quality connectivity to all the interested parties that were seeking to access this tremendous amount of literary treasures, if you will. So it was a very large task and over several years before things really took shape.
So how does a technology company go about preserving history from centuries ago?
So as I promised, once again, because of the nature of the project and this environment and the critical nature of the library contents, there's always a much deeper story before, modern technology partners were able to basically engage successfully. So a very key person, Mr. Luciano Amente, was the IT director of the Vatican Library. And he was a very important individual for every partner involved on this historical undertaking. So his work in the Vatican began back in 1983. And you can imagine this came with enormous responsibility and much honor to be in that position. In fact, before the technology pieces for the library began taking shape, Mr. Mente had shared that his ability to really properly serve, this amazing library required a different approach. And he actually had to understand kind of the passion and the love necessary to become an integral part of the library itself, because without that understanding, this project would not have been successful. This was just not digitizing some artifacts. There was so much more tied to it. So this long-term undertaking required his level of dedication to really innovate around some things that really had never done before. Some of these artifacts had never been really exposed or been publicly available. So in that mindset or belief, that set out the vision to really preserve the history. And some things like, there's no future for anybody if you don't have a past, or moreover, if you don't preserve it. So transforming everything in the data center to be able to offer a chance for a global audience to basically relive the past was really their objective, to provide a pathway to preserve and secure that. So you think about documents written centuries ago by hand and the necessary high resolution scanning processes. There was a lot of work, a lot of first trial and error to get through it. So these books and artifacts are very sensitive. They've been exposed to 100 years of bacteria handled by thousands of people. So there's a lot of expertise and researchers on the project for a last time, long before it could even become digitized. So, we had to stay very, very focused on this. We were dedicated to the history and the heritage of the Vatican, but also bringing that information forward globally. So, Carrie, long response, but as you can tell, this project ran much deeper than some technology companies just digitizing a tremendous amount of artifacts. So the real sense of connection to this work, and that's how we basically were able to stay connected to it. So my good friend, Gian Piero Di Martino, who basically directed and orchestrated all the Panduit activities over the course of the project, and still is, basically said to me, quote, "In 1,000 years, you'll be able to see something written 700 years ago." So, there's a lot of additional non-technology pieces that had to be addressed before we even delved into that.
And do you think, these artifacts are so old, like you said, and some of them are deteriorating. Is there the idea that these won't even be around? And so part of the project is, okay, we want to make sure there's still a way to read them, even if it's not the physical thing, it's digital?
Yes. And as you said in the opening, it's yes, the short answer to that is yes. And as well, it's artifacts besides just print, right? There's coins and metals. There's things that need to be scanned that do not lend themselves to being touched or engaged or interacted with humans. And then outside of that, this library, if many people know, it goes beyond just maybe some of the religious relics. I mean, this is open to some of the world's greatest, architectural documentations, manuals, and there's scientific pieces in here. So although it's sitting in sort of a religious site, it goes beyond that. So there is a wide interest and anticipation for folks to see and have access to that. So to your point, some of those things aren't going to be around very long, or they're starting to deteriorate. So this process is to really preserve that over hundreds and thousands of years for sure.
Can you share with us specifically what kind of equipment you used for this client, and maybe, the type of equipment people would be using for any type of historic preservation and moving it to tech?
Yeah, so great question, Carrie. So as unique as we've talked about this project being and sets itself apart, there are some commonalities, right? So for instance, for any typical data center that we've worked on or deployed, things like space and cost were at a premium. So no surprise here. As I mentioned in the opening, the first project we had was really offsite as a test. And then when you come into really the more critical nature inside the Vatican Library, we were space constrained, and things were really squeezed down from a typical main data center with about a quarter of the space. So anything that was high density was absolutely mandatory. So we were able to deploy things, for example, as I mentioned earlier too, this is not going to be a high touch, a high access area. You have to kind of get it right the first time and sort of quote unquote future-proof it going forward. So in addition to space savings and high density deployments, we were able to deploy a universal hot aisle containment system, which, as you can imagine, this information is critical. The assets are critical. So temperature, humidity is of the utmost importance. So there's a hot aisle containment system deployed, roughly about 10 data center cabinets. We were able to talk about looking at the investment put in place. We deploy what we call branded smart zone power distribution units. And then we had several sensors for humidity, temperature, security. There were fiber connectivity, category 6A cable, OM3 fiber, path rays. All this infrastructure is needed to support the networking and the server and the storage inside there. Again, so it's nice to say day one you have that, but what's really going on there? Can you monitor that? Can you pull data? So really, we put in a layer one infrastructure, which is pretty common to most, I think, on the call. But we embedded a level of intelligence, so the IT group could have low touch and predictability and capacity insights to make sure that they weren't going to outgrow this without notice, or any kind of alarm or warning or perceived danger to the equipment could be captured proactively.
Now, will all of this need to be updated in the years to come? And how do you keep the security up to date on this in the future?
Yeah, so again, the other similarity to other data centers is just the dynamic nature. So currently, the Vatican Library, they've digitized just under 20,000 manuscripts out of about 80,000 that you had mentioned. So they're just at about 25% of the total. So, if I dare say, this is kind of a life's work. So the reality is every year new manuscripts are making its way to the library, donations for things to be restored and preserved, kind of changes the scope. So obviously more manuscripts, more data, more storage, more connections, more networking, it continues on and on. So as much as we try to properly engineer the data center and update the technology, we're certainly going to expect new expansions. So long-term, our ability to test and implement, make sure there's warranties in place. You mentioned about security elements, as best we could. We gave a lot of forethought, again, as I mentioned, through a team collaborative approach with other vendors. So yes, highly dynamic, and security is the utmost concern. So that's kind of where they are today, and it's going to continue to grow as we go forward.
Now, you also partnered with Dell EMC to complete this job. What was that like, and how did they help you with this client?
Yeah, so keeping in the themes with, kind of an ecosystem or partnership. So in general, if you think of where Panduit plays from physical infrastructure, we literally provide the element that connects all the networking and storage and compute. So the relationship there is very complementary, and it's a natural one. So in the beginning, we realized that NTT was, as I mentioned, part of the project very early on, supporting all the storage piece. And at the time, it was just EMC, and now it's Dell EMC. But basically, our groups got together, our experts, our subject matter experts got together and continue and periodically check in to see what the requirements are needed, right? Through our work and through system integrator work, we're able to continue to assess and define what the best integration is going forward. So, for example, as you can imagine, this data is what it's all about, right? And restoring that. So this environment has moved from 4 petabytes to 15 petabytes, and now it's actually exceeding 45 petabytes of storage. And we don't see that slowing down. So the Dell EMC was a huge part of that. Again, we have a long-standing relationship with those folks, as they mentioned, complementary. So, as one piece moves, the phrase goes, you don't want to be the weak link in the chain. So we're moving this thing together collaboratively to make sure we're delivering on those results now and into the future.
So Jeff, I have to ask you, have you been to the Vatican Apostolic Library?
Well, Carrie, the short answer is no. It was about to happen in recent terms before this global pandemic, but it was on the radar, certainly in the past couple of months. So I have not, but I'm absolutely still excited. It's on my bucket list, if you will, to get over there and visit it, especially when I talk to Gian Pero, our account manager. He's more than accommodating to get us in there.
That will definitely be exciting for you to see it, not only for what it is, but to know that you had a place in the present and the future and history of that facility.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, the one question we ask all of our guests on this show is, where do you see technology going within the next year? And since you answered this last time when you were on, yes. I'm curious of your answer to this in the context of historic preservation and technology.
Yeah, so thanks for looking at that question that way, Carrie. So it's interesting when you go back and look at this project, right? It kind of takes you back to a history lesson its own. You look at technology, how things were being captured and recorded, right? The old stone and chisel where people engraved their knowledge and captured it. And to where we are today is absolutely baffling. And so I think this project does set up for other industries, other geos around the world to take some best practice from that. So in this perspective, it's hard to give an accurate response because it's so specific, but you can naturally see just the amount of history and the artifacts and manuals, photographs, manuscripts, drawings. They're not going to slow down. And that digitization, as I mentioned, is still really very early on in the scope of the work. So this infrastructure is going to have to scale, both on capturing the information, storing it, and retrieving it. I'll tell you what kind of was interesting that came out of it from where the technology is going is of related importance. As the technologies have continued to progress in this environment, just one example, having the ability, you sort of touched on this, of having people, human interfaces, just having the ability to not have to fully open a book or a manuscript, for example, for a scanning. That's usually important. And they have this technology in place. So basically that's preserving, the spine of these documents. And it's extremely beneficial to preserving the original as we go and digitize it for the future. And additionally, other technology that's interesting is there's been further discoveries through some of the high resolution scanning technology. I found this really interesting. As the scanning's gotten better, it's being captured, there's been some discovery of some further embedded writings within the same page. So almost like multiple layers, if you will, captured on the same page. So that's really increased the amount of data and history to preserve. So it's an the library is just amazing. It continues to yield more knowledge and history for future generations to enjoy. So that's going to keep dictating the technology and where it's heading. And again, this is kind of a first in its class. So it's very exciting.
Okay, well, now I want to know, what did it say? Do you know?
I don't know. I think that's part of the scanning process. But, all this information, as they scan it, it becomes publicly available. So I don't know if they delineate what's hidden in those pages, but I know that was pretty amazing to find that out with the technology evolutions. That's for sure. Yeah,
that's extremely exciting. If people want to learn more about what we're talking about, or they want to connect with you to ask questions or learn more about Panduit, where can they do that?
Yeah, so there's a couple spots. So the easiest is obviously going to panduit.com. We have a real nice write-up kind of summarizing this, a case study, if you will, on our website. So if you go to panduit.com and you look for case studies, or just type in Vatican Library case study, that'll show up. We also have, I would recommend for the audience to do a quick Google lookup. That'll get you there. Put the Vatican Library site. You can go on there and actually, to your point, if people are excited to see what's in there, what's been done, that will take you right into the library. You'll see exactly all the images, the work that's been done. It's writing on that Panduit infrastructure, again, globally available. So that's a great place to actually go see these treasures. And then there's also a really nice, I think it's 2 to 3 minutes. It's a Twitter video. It's basically called like How Panduit Did It. And again, if you do a search, it'll pop up, and that's probably the best way to go in and see like the unique benefits to what's available there. So, and then lastly, kind of where you're going before, if need be, if you guys ever find yourself in Italy, I could talk to my colleagues over there. we can try to arrange something for you. But there's more than a few outlets to go get a little more detail on the outcome.
No, I thank you so much for being here and sharing the knowledge and really kind of blending this mix of history and preservation and technology. I think sometimes people think technology is in its own space, and I love that you're showing it can really kind of help preserve history as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great combination, a great balance between the old and the new, if you will, for sure.
It definitely is. Well, thank you so much, and we appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Carrie. Have a great day.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram Tech Soul with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Carrie Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Panduit. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.